And we hope that today that we are discussing a very important topic, that career in scientific research. I could say that India and USA, that if you compare, the very first thing I would like to highlight, that Indians in USA actually perform better. This is a very general line that everybody knows. In comparison to the Indians, they are staying in India. So once Professor Mukti said that out of 4,000 scientists, if you take, then you will find that only one Indian who is staying in India are actually among that list. So our approach has to be that India has a very huge scale, that we need important scale to actually improve in scientific research. And the helix model, that is very important model. We say that Hamiltonian model, that most of the research that is happening in the university, and the relation between the university, private, as well as the business. So that has to be correlated for the more scientific research. So we all are facing a very serious situation of COVID, and all are waiting, like the vaccination. So you are a very important person in this regard to actually also highlight the issues that we all are facing. It's because of we are not able to find out vaccination of the COVID. So I would by this thing I would say that we have to actually increase in India actually the scientific spirit and temper among our students, and the from the primary education to higher education. We actually try how that in science that we could actually increase the average level of education among us, which could take us better staying in India, and looking at the science with interest. So over to you, Biswajit, to moderate the session, and I would like that all students will take it with interest, and to ask questions to Ms. Pani, and who is a very great researcher. We all are proud of you, Pani, for giving your very precious time. And it's over to you, Vishwajit Pani, to moderate the session. And we are
Because bhai, she is Dr. Pani and he is Mr. Pani. So there is no difference.
Yes. I understand. She is Dr. Pani, and he is Vishwajit Pani. Okay. So please continue, and please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Vikas, for the kind introduction. Being the moderator, I'll start with how we do the webinar, a brief about how it should happen. We start with the topic, and then if you have questions, you can, for the participants, if you have questions, please put your question in the message box. And at the end of the talk, we will take the questions. Yes, so that's, hopefully it is clear to all of you. Then I'll start with a brief introduction of Vibhusita. She is now working as a senior research scientist in the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Pharmacology in the New York University School of Medicine in New York. She hails from a small town in Odisha in the district of Kalahandi. She went to Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalaya at Narla. After finishing her PhD from Center of DNA Fingerprinting and Diagnostics in Hyderabad, she moved to New York for her postdoctoral studies. She worked at the Rockefeller University, which is one of the world's leading biomedical research universities. She then accepted a position at New York University School of Medicine under the Robertson Fellowship Award, where she had studied mechanism of stress response pathways in neurodegenerative disorders for 9 years. Her research findings have led to identification of new drug targets for neurodegeneration in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. She continues to develop new therapeutic modulations and drug targeting in those diseases, funded by the highly competitive I cannot pronounce, what is that, Blavantik Award, right, HHMI grant. Currently she is also a mentor for few PhD students and MD for the research developments. She holds many US patents. She has authored many research articles. She has over 20 peer-reviewed publications so far. So yes, so we are glad that you are with us today to talk to students, to talk to all of us, and over to you.
Thank you, Biswajit. That was very generous introduction, and thank you for everyone for having me over here. And I hope I can make it worth your time. Let me see, where should we start, right? So I have been like pestering Biswajit about, who are going to be the people who is going to be listening to me. So I guess we are just going to be talking about higher education and a research career, right?
I think it will be very good if you could take us through your journey, actually, right? From a small village in Odisha to now being a scientist, right? And you can take us through, and then you can also touch upon different aspects of how you actually went on with higher studies and everything, right? Everything about your journey. We like to know.
Cool. All right. So my journey starts in a place called Kalahandi in Odisha. I don't know if any of you know about this place, but when I was over there, it was actually a small, really small place. There was not much there, and girls' education was, if anything, optional. But I was lucky to be in a family that supported my education. So after my 5th grade, I went to a boarding school called Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalaya, which is how I also know Biswajit, for your information, right?
Yeah.
So I went to Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalaya, which is a boarding school, but it's a school for people with, people that come from modest backgrounds, but that also have a higher IQ. So I was fortunate to have been let into this school, and we actually received very good education over there. I went to the school up to my 10th grade. After my 10th grade, I moved out to general education system. So I did my 12th and my bachelor's in zoology honors, so biology background, in a college called Government College Bhavani Patna, which is also in Kalahandi. So I spent most of majority of my life in Kalahandi, the first 20 years. And once I finished my bachelor's in zoology, I wanted to go for higher education. I still remember there was a big stigma about girls getting higher education, because at that time it was more about you study up to a certain level and then you get a job or not, or you get married, because you have that used to be the ambition back then. So there was a little bit of a struggle over there to convince my parents to let me go for master's. And I said I was only going to be gone for 2 years. I'll be back like this. So I went to do my master's also in Odisha. It's a university called Sambalpur University in Odisha. I studied life science there, and my specialization was biochemistry. So very modest, nothing fancy, and just standard education. But then when I was doing my master's, I found out that I could write an exam called JRF NET. So that actually still goes on in India. So JRF is a Junior Research Fellowship. It's an exam. It's all India level exam. Back then it used to be only conducted by CSIR and GBT. But these days, you also have DST. ICMR used to do those for medical students, but now I think it's more common. I wrote that exam junior fellowship, which was definitely one of of my career. So now I had this national level fellowship, and to be honest, I didn't know what to do with it, because there weren't that many people from Odisha at the time with this fellowship, or the ones that got the fellowship who had already left the university and they weren't even there. So that took me through a big chase of, okay, what to do next? And I didn't really have anyone to tell me at that time. So there was a lot of hit and trial, a lot of mistakes. And eventually, so I ended up in Center for DNA Fingerprinting and Diagnostics, which is a DBT-funded institute in India. Now, I will tell you more about it later, but it actually is a little bit hard to get into these institutes because you can only apply to these institutes if you have this junior research fellowship. And once you have it, you go through a written exam and an oral exam to pass this test. And once you do that, and then you get into the university, right? So, well, it was like an institute, research institute. So I went to CDFT. Since I had a specialization in biology, biochemistry, I took up a very basic biochemical project, which was rather simplistic, but detailed, thorough, very deep. So I was working on something that could be potentially used to make new class of antibiotics. I finished my PhD. I submitted my thesis in 2008, and then I applied for postdoctoral positions. I applied to a few places. I had my offers. I chose to come to New York because the city has a lot of life. The city has a lot of personality. It's like a melting pot of many different cultures, which was very attractive. And I'm a curious person by nature, so I had to come and see what was up. So I moved in here to the Rockefeller University. I was actually very fortunate. At the time when I was at the Rockefeller University, there were 4 Nobel laureates actively doing their research in the university, and the atmosphere of the university was extremely competitive, high-paced, and ambitious. So that definitely helped me a lot. In the very beginning, I used to be very nervous because I came directly from India. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any friends. I had no connections or anything. So it took me a while. It took me about 3 months to actually get a hold of the lifestyle here and to get into my research, in the way it would be productive. So I was still conducting basic research. So in research, you could say there are generally two kinds of research, basic and applied. Basic research often involves pursuing the truth, just to learn without any bigger or other purposes. You just want to learn what's happening in the cell. You just want to learn what's happening in deep inside your body. Now, applied research is something where you take the knowledge from the basic research and now you apply it to cure something or to fix a problem that the society has or people have. So when I was doing basic research up to 2011, and then I thought that it wasn't for me in long run. So I wanted to switch my fields to something that would be more suitable for applied research. And this is when I wrote this fellowship from Robertson Foundation, which was actually completely different from anything that was in my expertise. So my expertise was in bacteria. And here I was writing a project that would lead to neurons, like the nervous system, right, and the diseases. And I was very lucky to have actually, again, I went through interviews and I went through face-to-face conversation with the Robertson Foundation members, and I was selected for the fellowship. And this is when I moved to New York University as a postdoctoral fellow with my fellowship, where I started studying stress response, so if you understand, most of our diseases or any health ailments that we have are a certain kind of stress. Either it's a stress caused by an external agent like a virus right now, COVID, right? Or you could hurt yourself, bruise yourself, or you could have internal stress day-to-day psychological concerns, or not eating healthy, or eating living a kind of things. The level of stress. So it was always very translated into diseases, and if we could stop that. So that took me in the path of where I am now. So I started. I started with basic research in stress response, and then once I figured out a few mechanisms that were common to diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, they all have one common point. So what I do now is I target that point for drug targets, and then this is where I have my patent although Vishwajit said I have many patents, that's not true. I only have one US patent, and I have a few others in process, which is going to take time. It takes time in here. So yeah, that is pretty much my story. There is, it was smooth at times and not so smooth at some other times. And if there is anything like any take-home message from there, I would say just never give up. That's the only thing I can tell you.
But what were the challenges that you faced? You know it very well that being a woman, it is always a challenge to pursue higher study. In fact, you said that in the beginning of your talk.
That's
And
correct.
apart from that, pursuing a career in pure science itself is also quite challenging in India, right? How did you manage to overcome both of these challenges? Because our budding researchers are hearing to your talk right now,
Mhm.
and students would like to know how actually you overcame these challenges, right, in your journey.
Now this thing kind of hits home, but I will tell you. So, one of the biggest problem was to get past people's mentality that you wouldn't complete a PhD. In fact, this is gonna sound like a sad story, but I will tell you today, right? So I was not very ambitious in the beginning. I didn't think that I would actually make it to the top institutes of India. I was actually applying to mediocre institutes in India at that time. I know it sounds like a loser statement, but this is how it was. I was not very ambitious at that time. But there was a certain central university like that I applied to. And the reason they told me, and I already had a fellowship, mind you, right? So I was already coming with money, my own money. They told me, they asked me how educated my parents were and how rich my parents were, which, I mean, my parents are educated, but not highly educated. I was from a middle class family, not a rich family, and I was from Kalahandi. And they basically told me that I would waste their time and I would not be a good scientist. Therefore, they should not waste a seat to give it to me. And, to answer your question, Bishwajit, how did I do that? I think the answer to that is that I'm stubborn. So when somebody tells me I cannot do something, I'm like, well, I can. So this is when, this is when I went from mediocrity to actually, the higher, something that sounds more ambitious. That's because I felt like, again, this statement is going to sound very arrogant, but you have to remember that I was 22 years old and I didn't have the wisdom that I have now. I was arrogant sometimes. And I said that, well, mediocre people are going to think mediocre, so let me try higher, so maybe they would be more advanced in their thoughts and they would accept me. And I still remember when I was applying for my PhD and I was giving this interview, they asked me where I was from, and I said Kalahandi. And they said, you obviously grew up outside of Kalahandi. And it was like, it was almost like, I don't know if it was sad or happy. And I felt almost like a pride in saying that, no, I grew up in Kalahandi and I went to college in there and I'm here now. But again, I think my prediction was correct that when you go higher up, those people actually have a little bit more broad mind. And therefore, there are a little bit less hurdles. The hurdles are different though. So when I went to do my PhD, I mean, I spoke English, but not as well as people that came from JNU at that time. People were coming from IITs and JNUs and all these big name places. And I came from Sambalpur University, which people would call Chambal at that time. And I was like, that's not Chambal. So I had a problem because it was hard to talk, it was hard to express who I was. It also took me 3 months to actually get used to it. But again, if you really want to do something, you just have to look for alternatives. When something fails, never stop trying, because when something fails, there's something else that's not gonna fail. That would be my take. There's another thing, actually, point that Bikash brought up earlier when he was giving his section. why is it that in India, like, why is it that Indian scientists perform better outside of India, right? That's something that has bothered me a lot, because initially I used to think it was infrastructure, but that's not true. We have all the infrastructure we need back in India. And in fact, the lab where I was in, like, we had money, like, we had all the reagents, all the equipments, everything was great. There are two major reasons why I think that Indian people perform better when they leave India, or two and a half. The first is the system is not organized. It's a bit chaotic. So whenever you want to do something, there are a lot of, hurdles of, like, official hurdles. Like, you have to plan way in advance. Things are not as streamlined, so you have to wait longer for your reagents. You have to, things are changing now, but I'm talking about like when I was back there. But it's still not as organized as it is here. That's the first problem. A lot of bureaucracy problem. Course, because in a lot of times you are expected to follow somebody else's footsteps. But if you are a scientist, you should be able to take risks and think on your own feet. You should be able to think original. And I think, again, this is not a general statement. This is not a specific statement. It's a general statement. I think that originality is not as appreciated in India, because often the superiors, the supervisors that are on top, they see you as a threat. And when that happens, your progress is stalled. And then the people that are, like, rather average, that say yes to everything, those are the ones often given, they are given more chances because they don't threaten any authority. And then we get mediocre results, and the good ones just leave because they're frustrated, So I think that's why Indian science, although we have brilliant minds, and like I said, not all professors, like not all big scientists are this way, but a majority of the, scientific community is. So, that's what drags us down, I would say.
Yeah, thanks for a very detailed answer to this question. I'd like to ask you, how did you go to US, right? What was the journey like, and then what was the process like? How do you start, even like if you want to go abroad for your postdoc or even for a PhD? Can you take us through the application process? How much money that you need? Because oftentimes we think that, right, in order to go abroad you have to have a lot of money, right? And most people simply do not have money, right? How do they aspire to go abroad for higher studies?
Okay, so to be honest, there are in certain ways you do need money. So I'm going to break it down to two aspects, right? The PhD and the postdoc in this case. If you want to come to US to have a PhD, you do need a certain amount of money in your bank account. And I think it varies, anywhere, like in Europe, US, wherever you go, like you do need a certain amount of money in your bank account to show that you can support yourself for 1 year in case you don't get any, fellowship or something. So that is, unfortunately, like, for example, like I would not have been able to come to US for my PhD even if I wanted, because my father didn't have that kind of money. So that is a hurdle, but again, it's never the last, it's never the last stop, right? So I'm gonna start with PhD. So in order to go abroad for PhD, so you have to of course apply for PhD in different places, and so USA and Canada has a slightly different way of getting into PhD compared to European countries or UK or Australia, New Zealand, like those countries. So for USA, you need a GRE and the TOEFL. And in addition to that, of course, you're going to need your credentials. You're going to describe why you want to do PhD and what makes you a suitable candidate for the university you're applying to. And so, they do require you to have a certain amount of money in your bank account to show that you will be able to sustain yourself if you don't get fellowship. But let's assume that you do manage to have that much money. So sometimes what people do is, if they have, all right, Shiva Shankar, I will respond to that in a bit. Okay, so so sometimes what people do is like either they have that much money, or sometimes they just borrow it temporarily from friends and family to show it, right? Now, often when you are selected, you are also provided something called a graduate assistantship or a RA-ship, research assistantship, during your PhD, which pays you enough money for your rent and food. Like you won't be able to save a lot of money, but you will be able to sustain yourself by yourself. So showing the money in the bank account is really just like a preventive measure. You don't really need to spend that money, so a lot of people can actually still pull that off. Now, for postdoc, you don't need to show any money in your account because you're coming in. It's almost like a job. So you can have zero money in your bank account and you can still come in here. So for postdoc, you just need to find the PIs. Like when I say PI, I mean principal investigator. They are often professors in different universities or scientists in national institutes. Once you find something that you like, you often write them a cover letter with your CV. So the cover letter has to be detailed and very, very focused at the same time. Like you can't go beating around the bush. You have to propose something in literally 5 sentences in your cover letter, because nobody reads long emails. It has to be short and sweet. And then the detailed proposal of the project. So in this case, for postdoc, you need to propose a project that you would do in a certain lab that you are interested in. That needs to go in your research proposal. That would be a separate document. And then you would basically send your CV, your research proposal, in addition to the cover letter that is like the main body of text in your email. So once you do that, often there is like a Skype interview or like a video interview. And some PIs would actually also kind of pay you for a ticket to come and visit the lab, which is becoming more and more rare these days, but it does happen sometimes. And then once you're accepted, the university arranges a visa called J1 visa for you. This is again the most common. Sometimes they can give you H1B directly, but in most cases they give you a J1 visa, which is a student exchange visitor visa, which is how I came here in the first place. So the visa is usually for 5 years. So you are often set for 5 years, the first 5 years. So during those 5 years, you can always apply for your H1B and then switch to green card. It depends on like if you want to live here. Now, for the students, for PhD programs, you come here on a F1 visa, which is also given like to you by the university. And then once you're on F1 visa, when you finish your degree, you can get on something called a OPT, using which you can actually start working here while somebody sponsors your H1B. So that's pretty cool. It's not hard at all. Now in Europe, situation is a little bit different. In Europe, you don't need a GRE. Some places will ask for TOEFL, and some places will need a IELTS, like Australia needs IELTS, New Zealand too, I believe. In countries of European Union, so if you're going to Germany or Finland, like places that are non-English speaking, sometimes they require you to pass a basic test of their language. In Finland, you could actually choose the program either in English or Finnish, for example, and then you may or may not require to pass a Finnish test. You could just get in through a TOEFL. But the major difference there is that during PhD itself, you have to find a place where you want to work, and you have to talk to the professor, and you have to come up with a pretty solid proposal, because you're evaluated based on your proposal and how you present. So this is when I tell everyone that your speaking skills has to be polished and they have to be good. So if you feel that you are not very good at speaking, the one way to do that is record your video of yourself presenting to yourself, record it, improve it, do it again until it gets better and better and better. The less grammatical mistakes you make, the less fumbling you do, the more convincing you sound. Unfortunately, because this is how our brain functions. I always say that just because somebody speaks better English than you, they're not smarter than you. It's just that they can convey their ideas better than you. So I know that like most of you probably already do it, but if you don't, then definitely pay attention to it. And did I miss something, Mr. Jeet?
No, okay, I was on mute, sorry. Yes, it was pretty detailed, I would say. So, yeah, there's a question from Sivasankar. It's about how do you see justify the ranking of university, right?
Okay, so I am Sivashankar. I'm not entirely sure what you're asking, but let me try. So, are you asking how do we choose the university? Or are you asking how do they know which university is better? Can you clarify a little bit?
Yeah, maybe I can clarify a bit on behalf, but he can also clarify. Please unmute and clarify. But I think I'm curious to know, like, do we go by QS ranking, or what is the way to, like, how do you choose an university, right? It is using the standard ranking, or you evaluate based on your own area of specialization, right?
Both, right? So of course, like you have the Ivy League, places like the top universities like Harvard, MIT, like the big names, right? Now, as soon as you take big names, your CV also has to be big to match those big names. Of course, we should start from that. So all those big names will have requirements. So again, like to kind of add to my points that I did earlier. Sometimes if you're aiming for the top universities, you have to take a subject GRE in addition to general GRE. And that helps your application a lot because it kind of puts you in a small pool of people that have not taken subject GRE. Now, the top of the top, they would have a cutoff of your GRE score. They would have a cutoff of your credentials. So, like if you go to Indian school, the credentials are different than it's here. So you might need to get it translated and then see where you fit. So it's necessary to apply to places where you fit, meaning that you don't want to apply to all the top places if you have a mediocre CV, if you have a mediocre credentials, because then you're going to get rejected. If you have top of the top, go ahead, by all means apply to all top, right? But not everybody is going to be in top of the top. Like, we're all going to be in a range. Like somebody would be up here, somebody would be over here. Now, what you can do is like, you apply, like let's say you're somewhere like, you're somewhere near the top, but not quite at the top. So one of the smartest thing to do is apply to some of the top high, like big name universities have a few safe options where you will get accepted no matter what. Because let's say you want to go to Harvard or Princeton, right? But your initial credentials are not good enough, like not like just a little bit below what they need. You could come to something like Rutgers, like something a little bit lower, and then you can always switch from one university to another. Now you have better credentials because you have taken coursework here. So this is another way. So always have a few options that are safe options, right? So top universities by global ranking, like pick them by global ranking, and then see if they have the program that interests you. If some university is top in quantum physics and you want to do biology, then it's not a good match. If you want to do biology, you have to see which one is top in biology, right? And same goes for anything. Like if you want to do quantum physics, you don't want to go to Rockefeller University because Rockefeller is biomedical. They have a physics section, but that's not as good as their medical section, for example, right? So you have to choose. The first point is, what do you want to do and which universities are best at it? And then it's not just the universities. You also have to look at which professors are working in that university and if they are accepting students. It makes sense to email them and say, hey, dear Professor Smith, like, whatever, Professor blah, 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 I'm interested in applying to this university and I find your research work very exciting and this is what I would like to do. If I get accepted, are you accepting students currently? And often they would actually, they would talk to you, they would email you. And this brings me to another point, that getting in touch with the professors in the university is extremely helpful because they already know you. familiarity is extremely helpful. If you have your uncle in the university already, that's great, but most of us probably don't. So getting yourself, like, become a familiar face among people that are going to interview you, it helps a ton.
Okay, thanks for the answer. There is another question on the YouTube live session.
Excuse me. Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I have a query on it. Actually, few years back, I was in Brown University for 1 month. There was a professor, Glenn Lowry. He is a racial economics. I had a talk with him. And also, after my PhD, I again talked with him regarding my postdoc. Then I told him my research area, and also, but his answer was his broader area, focusing area of the research was racial economics. So he compelled me, if you are interested to do the racial economics and racial in the USA, then we can think of it. But I was a little, I was not that much interested in the particular area, though my research area was a little different from it. So that basically sometimes also happen when we have in the context of the topic choose on the basis of the particular area of research, on the basis of the basically the professor's interest, somehow it mismatched. So that basically creates a lot of problem. Hello? Did you get it?
Yeah. I missed who was speaking though. Could you tell me your name, please?
Hello?
I missed who was speaking.
Actually, this is Dr. Shivashankar Sahu from Ravenshaw University. I am a faculty in Ravenshaw University now.
Sushant, you
Hello?
said? Sushant.
Shivashankar Sahu. Dr. Shivashankar Sahu.
Also, I have a little difficulty hearing, but I did hear your question. So, yes, in fact, if you don't have a match, it doesn't make any sense to go to that lab, even if you know them. But if their interest doesn't match with yours, it really is not useful. So yeah, that would be my short answer. What you could do is, if they actually like you can ask them to provide a reference. So when you apply to some other university, right, they can give a reference saying that, okay, I know this person and this person is a good scientist. So of course, even if somebody's area of research does not match your interest, it is still worth keeping in touch with them, because they will serve as references for you. And the more references you have, the better it is, because you never know what you will need them for at some point,
Okay, there is a question on YouTube live. It's a question from Subhadra Priyadarshini. How can we write a good research proposal for funding?
Correct. Okay, so how can we write a good research proposal for funding? The first thing is to identify your question. What are you asking, right? So something that you're asking, it often is helpful if it's hot area of research, like COVID, for example, right now. Now, when something is hot, it's also going to be competitive. So you have to pick something that other people are interested in. And then you have to be different so that they notice what you're writing, right? So it has to be interesting and then unique. So your idea and proposal has to be unique. Now, that is not enough. Then you have to justify that whatever you're proposing, you are actually capable of performing those experiments. They've done something similar already. So you would have to have a lot of preliminary data, regardless of what kind of proposal you're writing. So even for the smallest of the proposals that theoretically on paper do not require preliminary data, it's the unsaid rule that they all require preliminary data. Even if they say that we don't need anything, they still do. So basically justify that you are able to perform the experiment. So those are the three major points, that this is what I'm asking. This is how I'm going to do it, and I know how to do it, right? And then if you don't know how to do it, you have to give justification of, I have people that can show me, like, collaborators, for example, and then you have to have reference from them. That's pretty much it. If you can nail that, then that's it. And then, of course, like if you're aiming for like R1 or HHMI, like big fellowships, then it does get pretty competitive. Also, like, you have interviews sometimes, and then you have to be confident in what you're doing, and you have like basically show that you are able to think on your feet, because you also have to have a backup plan for every aim, right? Because when you have an aim of the experiments, it can either work or not work. So you would have to have thought through every possible scenario that aim could lead you to, and then you have to show that you are covered. Even if it fails in one way, how can you still make it successful? Because people that are funding you, what they want to see in the end of the day is that something came out of this work, right? So, yeah. They need to know that you have thought through every possible pitfalls, and you know what you're doing. So I see here there are some other. Prafulla Swai has asked, is there any difference exist between US and European universities' working nature? Yes, exactly. There is a lot of difference. So the work culture in US and Europe is very different. In US, it's more hard work, long hours, and so in here people work a lot more than Europe. In Europe, there is more preference of work-life balance. So meaning people would often do 9 to 5 and take their life outside of work very seriously. So people are a little bit more family oriented in Europe. If you want to have a family, I think it's easier in Europe compared to US. Excuse me. So yeah, definitely the work culture is different. But that also brings me to a point where in US, the funding is actually a little bit easier to get compared to Europe. Meaning there are just more fundings. There is more private fundings in US as well compared to Europe. We have Vibhuti Ranjan has asked, why do Indian students prefer to study abroad? So I would say that probably because you want to get introduced to a different culture. Now, studying abroad has a couple of different, benefits, right? Like first, of course, you learn to work in an environment that you are not familiar with. That increases your resilience. That increases how adaptable you are, right? You can adapt quickly or not. So sometimes for people that are not very good at adapting, in fact, doing research in India, they might be more productive and more successful than going abroad. So abroad is not everything, Don't get me wrong. Just because I'm abroad, that doesn't mean that, like you can do great research career without setting foot outside of India. Let me tell you that. Like, if you're determined, if you're good, it doesn't matter where you are. Sometimes people like to leave out of India is because, especially what was my motivation was in India, there is a lot of politics and I'm not good at it. So I thought, okay, if I left India, it would be easier for me because things are a little bit more straightforward outside of India. Politics is abroad, like, they also have politics in Europe, US, like everywhere there is politics. But in India, there's a little bit more dirty politics compared to, outside of India, in Europe and, North American countries especially. So, that's another point, I think. And travel, get to know new things, like a new way of living. So that's definitely exciting. So that's probably another motivation of doing PhD abroad. What else do we have? Please keep your, okay.
There is a question from Vikas. His question is about, please could you highlight about your present research?
All right, so I wrote that up there. So please also highlight about your present research and also highlight how your students from graduate level can prepare and bring interest in scientific research, and what are the specific steps required by our universities to do more scientific research who have given autonomy. All right, let me try. Cool. So, highlight my present research. Cool. So, I'm studying neurodegenerative diseases, like I told you. So, what I do in molecular terms is that, well, as your cells age, or as your cells get older, most of the cells, like, the cells that are not renewing all the time, like neurons, muscles, heart cells, they start to accumulate some junk. We call them aggregated proteins. So you need something to sweep out those aggregated proteins or dissolve them, right? So those are called chaperones. So what I particularly do is I tweak how to make the chaperones. Therefore, I can target many diseases with one drug, with one intervention. It may not be just one drug all the time, but with one kind of intervention. And so, yeah, this is what I do. So I do a bunch of drug screenings. In addition to that, one of, like, I call it my superpower. I can take your skin cells and turn them into neurons. What we're going to do in future is that we're going to develop hopefully, if everything works. So this is the other patent I'm working on. So the idea is, because like a lot of neurodegenerative diseases are not genetic, we want to find out who are susceptible, like who has the chance of developing this disease, but this is not genetic, so we cannot just sequence and find out. So we want to take a little skin biopsy when people are in their 30s, turn them into neurons, and see if they have a tendency to form this diseased neurons. If they do, then perhaps we can stop it before the disease happens through like a dietary supplement or something of that sort. I wouldn't call it a vaccine, but it's more like a preventive measure so that you don't get neurodegeneration and you age slowly, like brain aging, right? Like when we age, our brain kind of gets a little, slow. So we want to prevent that. So that's my main, long-term goal as of now. Now, let me see. There was another part to that question. All right. So how can you prepare and bring interest in scientific research? You can't. So unfortunately, scientific research is something you cannot put it in somebody's head. And I'm talking from a practical perspective here, right? Because there is very little money in academia. So it's not a lucrative career for a lot of people that want to make money. You will make money in academia if you become successful, of course. Successful professors, like successful scientists, make a lot of money. But there is only a very small percentage that get to that stage. And the path is hard and ugly sometimes. So you can't just tell people, okay, all right, you're gonna be a billionaire if you do science. That doesn't work. So the interest has to come from within, right? So this is the internal motivation that you have to have, that I want to do this. I want to change the world. I want to cure cancer. That has to come from within. And then once you have it, then you can top it off with the external motivation. External motivations are your friends. Like if you have a bunch of friends that think like you do, you talk, and it's like a snowballing effect, but a positive snowballing effect, right? So you want to do something, your friend wants to do the same thing, and you want to do it more and more and more and more, it gets better. So this is one kind of external motivation. The other kind is internet, reading, books. So when you have a little bit interest in something, you read about it. When you read about it, now you know about it a little bit more, so your interest goes up. And you read more, dig deeper, your interest goes up. So the seed interest has to be already there. So often what happens, somebody plants it in you. In my personal experience, my father planted it in me. He bought me a scientific reporter when I was I remember 7 or something like that. So scientific reporter book, I read it, and I remember at time Prussiner got a Nobel Prize by discovering prions, and that attracted me to these aggregation-mediated diseases in the brain. And after all these years, here I am doing exactly what I wanted to do when I was 7 years old, right? So at that time, of course, I didn't know I would get here, but it's like the seed that somebody plants in your head. It stays, and then it grows bigger and bigger until it's like a tree. So Bikash ji, like I'm not entirely sure what you mean by the last part of your question, where you see what are the specific steps required by our university to do more scientific research who have been given autonomy. Like, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by autonomy, but are you saying that the autonomous institutes, how they can prosper better in scientific research? If that is what you're asking, then my answer is oh, cool, yeah, perfect. So the autonomous institutes often perform a lot better than the non-autonomous ones. This is why, if you notice, there are CSIR institutes, there are, all these DBD institutes. So research institutes often perform a lot better than universities in India. So NCBS, CCMB, NII, these are some of the top institutes. They pretty much function on their own and do world-class research. Like, if you come here, you tell them that you came from one of those institutes, you're going to be respected. How can they improve it further? My guess, by giving more freedom to the younger brains, So some people do. There are some PIs in India, they're marvelous. They give all the freedom you need. But in India, since we are always pressed for time and pressed for money a little bit compared to some other places, so the autonomy is not given away as generously, because in science, autonomy also means spending a lot of money, right? Research is expensive. So sometimes you don't want to waste your money. So I think the curriculum can be designed in a certain way that gives a certain amount of autonomy to the students, to exercise their ideas, but also keeps a strong check on them so they don't become wasteful. So I think that's a balance that you have to hit. So right now, I think there are only certain labs in India that hit that balance and perform very, very good. But if they could take that model and kind of apply it to the entire institute or to the entire country, that would be amazing. A little bit more structured autonomy for the students in this case. And let's see. Deepak Das says, some scholars argue in the area of research and public policy, Indian research scholars are focused on flagging issues, while foreign research scholars are more oriented towards finding solutions. Is this assumption correct or false assumption? To be honest, I don't know. Right? I don't know the answer to that question. However, I know exactly what you're thinking, right? Now, finding a problem is the first step to finding a solution, right? Now, finding a problem in the proposed solution is necessary too. Because, I'm going to give you an example of hydrochloroquine in COVID, in Corona, right? So when Corona came out, US government was like, oh, well, we're going to treat people with hydroxychloroquine. And there was barely any evidence, but some people were getting better with it, some were not, and the government was pushing hydroxychloroquine. In fact, threatened India and got the hydroxychloroquine from India. So that was supposed to be a solution, but it was not. So scientists, of course, had to raise their voice and say, no, this is not a good solution, right? So in this case, in terms of example, the problem is COVID, right, Corona. The solution was hydroxychloroquine. Finding a problem with the solution was us telling them that hydroxychloroquine is not a good solution, right? So this is general evolution of science. If we didn't have those, we would not be getting better in anything, right? The one thing India kind of lags behind is that sometimes they stop after finding the problem. They're like, okay, there's a problem, we're not going to do anything about it. So of course that's not going to help, right? And this is when it comes in that they're oh my God, now this direction, but there's a river, so I'm going to give up, right? Instead of building a boat to cross the river, they just sit there in the bank, say, I'm not going forward, right? So this is a place where definitely, not only India, a lot of countries have exact same problem, and they can definitely make so much more improvement. It's all right, if there's a problem, solve it, right? But if there's a solution, don't accept it right away. Don't accept it fully, for that matter. Always think from your own brain, right? Cool. What do we have here?
Yeah, we have quite some question.
Yes, so Prafulla Swine says, is it appropriate to write or approach professor directly for postdoc position or apply through university website? Directly, always directly. I'm going to tell you some of, like, one of my own experiences here. So I wanted to go to this professor in MIT. So when I was moving out from Rockefeller, I wanted to go to MIT, and there was this professor that I was very interested in. And the website said that she had no position, she had no space in the lab, and please do not apply, right? It was literally written on the website in bold letters, do not apply, we are not accepting applications, right? And as I told you guys earlier, I'm a little stubborn, I applied. So I wrote a proposal and I applied. No response because they told on their website, do not apply. 10 days later, I get an email from the professor saying that, hey, I read your proposal. It sounds good. Do you want to have an interview? I'm like, hell yes, right? So I had an interview with her. I mean, it was true that she didn't have any space in her lab. The lab was literally physically full. I actually got the offer. I got an offer, but she said that somebody had to leave in 6 months and then I could join. And this was one of the most prestigious professors in MIT. I mean, unfortunately, she died of cancer. And hence, I didn't go there. But yeah, so never say no for an answer. Never take no for an answer. Don't believe what the website says when you're applying for postdoc position. If you're interested in somebody's science, write an email. But it has to be precise, strong, out of the box. You have to get yourself noticed. Otherwise, they get like, I'm not even a professor and I get like about 10 applications a week. My professor gets like, 10 a day. So, yeah, make an effort whenever you're making application, but always write directly to the professor.
There's a very good question from Deepak, which is about, there is a notion that Indian research scholars are focused on flagging issues while foreign research scholars are more oriented towards finding solutions. Is this assumption? Sorry, is this correct? Or is just a... Yeah.
Somewhat, not entirely, somewhat. I wouldn't completely agree with it, but I already answered that when I talked about the COVID and, the problem, the solution, and problem with the solution, the hydroxychloroquine example that I gave you. That's exactly what I was addressing. Okay, what else do we have? Do you also buy the arguments that AI is going to alter the way we do scientific research? Your research area, if so, how Indian students get prepped for this domain? And what are the major challenges we face in India? Cool. I do think AI is going to alter the way we do scientific research. Big time. It already is doing it in a way, right? Because some of the things AI can process much faster than we can and already give us more directed, areas. So that's going to be the good part, right? And the bad part is sometimes I think we would pursue something the AI predicted as opposed to something that a person that might be smarter than the AI predicted. So there's like a double-edged sword. But yes, I do see it's going to change research in a big way. For sure.
There is a question from our YouTube live. It's a question from Ramakrishna Mishra. Is there a way to get into top-ranked universities for PhD coming from not so well-known universities?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. It's perfectly fine if you're coming from a not so well-known university, as long as you have good grades, because they do look at your grades. Like if you don't have a certain amount of grades, unfortunately, they don't accept you. In the US, if you're looking at Europe, on the other hand, it's a little bit more flexible. Marie Curie Institute, for example, European, big institutes in Europe and then big institutes in the United States. But as long as you have very good GRE score, both general and subject GRE, that will definitely put you above a lot of other candidates. So it's it's totally possible to get into top universities without coming from like well-known universities in India. Again, as long as you have references. Actually, you need strong reference letters, meaning some other scientists, like other people that are in big positions, when they vouch for you and say, okay, I know this person is smart. So networking is extremely important, right? So no matter who you work with, no matter where you are, try to reach out to people that are sort of in good positions, like, that are big names, and that would be able to refer you and say, well, this person is good. And it definitely plays a big part in hiring.
There is another question from our YouTube live. It's a question from Ipsita Mishra. She is just about to start her graduation. She is just completed her 12th standard. What advice, ideas should you give to the freshers before they start moving towards the research fields? And this question is from a complete novice who has absolutely no idea about the career in research. She is just about to start her graduation. What's your advice going to be for her?
Right. Develop the aptitude, right? So because you just finished 12th grade, now you're at a stage like, you're like the soft clay that can be molded into anything. So see who you want to be in future, right? You don't need to know your exact path. You don't need to know your exact steps right now, but see your general direction. So that is something you need to know, like generally where you see yourself in 10 years. And then start walking in that direction, like meaning, like, let's say you are in a point and you just want to you don't need to know if you're going to Delhi or Bangalore or Mumbai or, Odisha. You just need to know that, well, I think I want to go north or south or east or west, right? Just the general direction. Now, let's say that you think, all right, I'm going to make a career in scientific research. Then you would put more effort in understanding the current affairs in science, the current affairs of, or the future, where everything is leading. So this is when, like, I kind of give this advice, no matter how old or how young you are, when you read something, read what's not written in it. I know it sounds crazy, right? So you will see that when people have answers to something, they talk about it. But when you can see what they're not talking about, that means they don't know about it. And that is what is your question. And that is what you can pursue, And this gives you a very, very strong edge on, like, out of the box thinking in that sense. Like, what are people not talking about? Like, when you read a paper, for example, in bachelor's, you will start doing experiments, you will start, learning more details about, whatever field you choose to join. Like, if you're doing physics, chemistry, you'll start to learn more details. So pick up some big names, people that are actively doing research in those fields, and see what they tell. Like, if you read a real research paper, read the discussion, the last section, and see what did they say, right? Now, if let's say you want to apply for administrative services, like, you want to do something else, that's good too. But then you have to also build your aptitude towards it. Slow and steady. Still works. It still works, Steady is important.
Okay,
what else do we have?
One question is on the dirty politics that you just shed some light on in the initial part of your talk. So a question from Dhiran Kumar: can you elaborate the dirty politics in laboratory life in India you highlighted, which pushes young, vibrant research scholars to go abroad?
There are a couple of different things. Well, again, like, since I left India, I'm not right in the middle of it, so I don't know all of it. But what I noticed is that, well, like, if you have a family member or somebody that knows you, if they're already at higher position, then like an award or you to get a recognition, compared to if you are someone that no one knows. Like, I myself was actually nominated for INSA Young Scientist Award when I was back in India, but of course, like, I wasn't gonna win it. I'm not saying that, like, I was the most deserving candidate, but there were other deserving candidates better deserving candidates that didn't win it because they didn't have the connections. Yeah, so it kind of kills enthusiasm. It kind of kills your motivation a little bit when you see that somebody is given more, somebody is lifted more just because their uncle is the director of something, or or just that they worked under someone that is famous. Like, let's say in India, you're working under a young professor that's not as famous, and somebody else is working under the director of an institute. You might be either similar or you might even be better than them in terms of publication or in terms of like your research, but they might get ahead of you just because they have this connection to these top ranking people that you don't. And that is actually extremely annoying at the very least. So, and I wish I knew an answer to how to get around it. I don't, other than the fact that networking perhaps would help you get out of your shell, talk to the big name people. It might sound like, what do we call it in here? Like buttering, right? You don't have to butter anyone. Like, trust me, like, I wouldn't survive a day in India the way I talk, like, straightforward to the point. But in my opinion, it does make sense to keep in touch and keep in contact. That kind of increases your chances a little bit. But unfortunately, India functions in this very, it's not progressive in any way. To, like, if there are people like, this one's coming from a family of scientists who has connections, but this one's like knowledge-wise over here. This one has no backup, whatever, and they're here. And then you push this one up. So this one loses interest eventually, like first time they will not, second time they will not. But after 5 times, they're going to start losing interest. And this is why either they leave, they're like, okay, I'm out, I don't want to do this, or they just perish slowly. A lot of brilliant minds don't make it anywhere. Unfortunate.
Yeah, we can take few more questions, I think, but perhaps one of the few last questions. One question is from Vikas, Vikas Singh. So his question is about how to go about applying for PDF. I hope that he means postdoctoral fellowship. I think you have touched upon how the different aspects of PDF, but maybe as a beginner, as somebody who just finished a PhD, how do you go about applying for PDF? Maybe you can shed some light on that in brief.
We kind of covered this already, but I will repeat again. So contact the professor, write a cover letter, write a research proposal, and have your CV, right? The cover letter has to be precise. So I stress this all the time. Always start the cover letter with doctor or professor, last name of the person. Like, never ever say that, never ever make a generic email. It has to be specific, should be addressed to the person you are sending it to. Okay, if you don't have a name, then they're not going to read it. And then the second part is introduce yourself. I am so and so. I work in so and so and so place. The next step is tell them why you're interested in their work. So that I read about your work in this and this journal, and I really like the idea of this and this and this. I like this part in your research. And then the next step is where you say, like, because of my experience in so and so, I would be a great fit for this project and I can do this for you. So you have to sell yourself, meaning like not yourself, but like you have to sell your skills by telling them that they will benefit from you. And that's basically it. If you can nail it, you will definitely get an interview call. And and so those are the only application that anyone even looks at. And so the research proposal, so it's okay if the research proposal is not long. It's fine if it's not detailed. It just has to be an idea that that's it. What else do we have?
Yeah, so I think we are pretty much done with the question. We are pretty much done with the questions. Just one last question from my side. Well, when I was a student, there was this confusion in my mind that should
Mm-hmm.
I choose a career in industry or should I go for higher studies like doing
Mm-hmm.
PhDs and postdocs and so on,
Yeah.
right? Well, I've seen the one side of it now that I have the experience of working in industry for a good 10 years
Mm-hmm.
now, but I
Mm-hmm.
haven't seen the other side of it, right? I get to hear from people, my friends who are in research teaching, but I like to know from the horse mouth, from you, what's the advantage of being in research over a career in other fields,
Um,
right?
I wouldn't say it's advantage or disadvantage in any way. It's really just what you want to do. Like for me
Like the bright
personally,
spots. I like to the bright spots
yeah. So
of this career.
personally speaking, for me, the advantage is satisfaction, the freedom of whatever I want to do. Now, again, I'm not the best example, but I do neuroscience in a lab that does microbiology, right? So my professor does microbiology and biochemistry. I came to this lab without any experience in neuroscience. I came to this lab with experience in microbiology and biochemistry. But I started from that, built bit by bit by bit, and I do neuroscience now. I have a small group of my own, like doing neuroscience. So this freedom to actually literally just exercise your brain and go where science, what you're aiming for, And now the other more practical thing is financial. So I do think that in terms of financial aspects, industry is way better than academia, because in academia it takes you pretty long to start earning good amount of money. In industry, you do it actually rather quicker. So having said that, the research in industry has actually improved a lot in past 10 years or so. Like it's not what it used to be back then. So you can be in industry and you can still have a considerable amount of freedom and make a good living. So but again, like a personality like me that just wants to go with the flow and wants to discover whatever comes my way would not survive in industry, or would not be, I mean, I would survive, but I would not be as happy in industry. I would make more money, but I wouldn't be as satisfied, if that makes any sense. So it really boils down to your personality in the end of the day.
Okay, good answer. All right. So in the interest of time, because we're already over time,
Yeah,
well, one.
I have to run to, I have a meeting at 12, so
Okay. Okay, perfect then. I think we are good. We are very happy the way you answer all the questions. Unless there is any last remark or any last question from anyone, I think we are good to close the call. And being the moderator, I like to thank you on behalf of Amopress family. We're glad that you could join us early in the morning on weekend, which is very difficult, at least for me.
for
It's very
me.
difficult to wake up in early in the morning, right?
Mhm.
After a busy week, you always like to
Mhm.
sleep more in the weekend, which I do basically. And
Same.
I'm really glad, and all of us are very glad that you could share with us your experience, and you were able to answer questions very pertaining, very important questions, right, related to research, career in research, academia in general, and also some of the anecdote that you shared with us today are extremely useful, not only useful for the budding resource scholar, but also students who are just about starting their career in higher studies, like undergraduation or post graduation. I'm sure they will also find this very useful, and there's a lot to learn from this lecture, and we are extremely thankful for your time.
Thank you very much. Actually, yeah, thank you for having me here. And if anybody has any questions, like anything, if anybody wants to reach out in person, you can always write to me on Facebook or Instagram Messenger. I will see them and I will respond to you. So feel free, stay in touch. And if anyone is applying for postdoc positions and if they want to take a look at their CV or letter, feel free to reach out. I can for you, I can correct stuff for you. So yeah, so feel free and all the best. Thank you for having me here again. Great work, you guys, Vishwajit. Yeah, I'm glad you invited me over, and yeah, I had a good time.
Pleasure is all ours, and thank you again. Have a
All
nice
right.
day.
Have a good
Talk to you
night.
soon. Yeah, cheers. Bye bye.
Bye.